Hi there, welcome back to another tutorial for the Vegetation Engine. I'm Christian. In today's video I want to talk about the motion settings from conversion to wind masks to using the motion elements and some tips and tricks. So let's get started. So let's start from the beginning. Let's convert the prefab and set the motion settings. I have this conifer tree from Speedtree, and I will open the Prefab Converter. And as you can see, it says select one or more or multiple prefabs to get started. Because Speedtree is not an actual prefab, it cannot be converted directly. So I need to select the asset in the hierarchy and drag it to the project window to create a new prefab. And once the prefab is created, as you can see, now the prefab is detected by the prefab converter. For the conversion preset, since this is a Speedtree 8 asset, I will go to Tools and choose the Speedtree 8 Vegetation preset and press Convert. So once this is converted, the Vegetation Engine will apply some default wind settings, and as you can see in this case, it is quite fluttering. I can go ahead, select the mesh, and go to the materials and change the motion settings. But since this prefab is using 3 materials, if I go to one of them and change some settings, as you can see, the wind is disconnecting. So instead of modifying the materials directly, I will select the prefab and go to the material settings. And the material settings will detect all the materials in the prefab, and it will override the settings for all of them at once. Yeah, in this case, because I modified one of the materials, I modified the primary bending. As you can see, this value is mixed. So in order to change it, I just need to go and set a new value to override it. I will set these values back to 0 and start from the beginning. So the Vegetation Engine motion is working in 3 layers. The first layer is the bending. The second motion is referring to the branch animation, or in case of ferns, for instance, we will use the leaves as branches, and the details motion is referring to leaves or edge animation. So let's go ahead and start with the setting. So the primary bending, if I set it, it will bend the tree. The speed is controlling how fast this animation is happening. For bending, I will keep it quite low. The scale will add a wobbly motion, not really useful in this case. And the variation will offset the animation. It is called phase offset in some other assets or tools. But in this case, the primary variation for the bending is not usable for trees, but it works for grass, for instance. All right, let's go to the second motion, which is for the branches. And let's start with the rolling. So the rolling will add this rolling animation. The vertical motion will move the branches on the y-axis. The squash is pushing the branches in the wind direction. And same, the scale is adding the wobbly motion, and we can offset this animation. So let's go for this tree with some rolling and vertical motion, no wobbly motion, and some phase of offsetting. And for the leaves, I will add a bit of flutter. And in a few seconds, we set the motion for this tree. All right, I have another asset, which is already converted, and it is a palm tree. And for palm trees, the squash motion, which is pushing the leaves in the wind direction, works great. I will set the squash motion to something like this, and maybe add a bit of scale, a bit of wobbly motion. All right, some bending, and a bit of flutter. It is always a good idea to check your wind settings in various conditions. So for instance, I need to always check in strong condition so the bending is not too much, or the other layers. So always test your animation in various wind conditions. So I think it looks pretty good. Let's go to the grass you saw earlier. For the grass, same settings, but as you can see, in this case, we only have 2 layers of motion because it doesn't really make sense to have the second motion for the branches. Yeah, a bit of scale, bit of variation, and a bit of flutter to make it more windy. If you like some of the settings, you can always save a preset. And let's actually do it. My grass, custom my grass. I save the preset, and now if I change the settings to something else, I can go to the material preset, choose my preset, and set the wind back to that preset. So far, everything is looking great. The wind animation works quite nicely, and it is all related to the wind masks baked into the mesh. We can visualize these masks by using the scene debugger. It is a new tool added in a recent TV version, and you can access it from Window, Boxophobic, the Vegetation Engine, scene debugger. And if you go to the mesh attributes, you can see the primary mask used for bending. The second mask used for branches, and as you can see, they are quite nice and accurate for these assets. And the details mask used for flutter, and in this case it could be a bit better if we have it on the edges, and same for this asset, but it works okay, so it is fine. And the most important of them all is the per branch variation. And if we check these assets, they have a nice per branch variation, including the leaves. That's why we can use the variation settings, and we can offset this animation nicely. And unfortunately, most of the assets on the store don't have this per branch variation, and we need to rely on some other tricks to fix this issue. For the assets that don't have variation, the Vegetation Engine will actually make a procedural variation, but the connection between branches and leaves is impossible to detect. So this variation will work for some of the assets, for ferns or grass, but not for trees. So let's see what we can do about these meshes without a proper variation. If you use the automatic presets, you might have seen that the branches are disconnecting. That's because on conversion, a procedural mesh, a procedural variation is added, and that is not super accurate in some cases. So instead of using some new meshes, I will reconvert this conifer, but I will override the mesh settings. Instead of using an automatic preset, I will choose the Speedtree preset again because I don't want to lose the textures, but I will use this override to use the automatic conifer masks. And now my mesh settings are changing, a procedural variation is added. And now if I convert from this distance, the animation might look okay, but if you go any closer, as you can see, the branches are disconnecting. So in this case, the only way to fix it is to set the variation to 0 and only use the scale settings. But this adds this wobbly motion and it kind of looks like shit. So how can we improve this if we don't have that variation? I will convert this preset with the same settings as before. But instead of using this mask for the branches, I will use the leaves mask for the branches as well. And in this case, having the same mask for the branches and for the leaves and dealing with that variation only per leaf, it will work better than the second tree. Let's convert again. And now if we go a bit closer, as you can see, the branches are static, and we can use this variation because it is per leaves. We can use the variation again. And if we compare these motions, the first one is looking the best, of course. The second one is not really good because it is just wobbly, but the third one is acceptable. So probably for 90% of the assets supported in the Vegetation Engine, I use the third approach. While working with this conifer, I noticed two issues that worth mentioning. The first one is the problem with the colliders. On the converted mesh, the colliders are rotated and placed at the prefab origin. This is happening because the converter is always baking the rotations to fix the issues with meshes exported from softwares like 3ds Max or maybe Blender as well, where the up axis is the z-axis, while in Unity the up axis is the y-axis. So in this process, those rotations are happening. And the second issue is that these small branches over here are moving like crazy, and that's because if we look at the branch mask, this mask is quite white. So let's fix these issues real quick. I will open the converter and I will choose an override for the transforms. So instead of transforming everything to world space and rotating these colliders, I will choose keep original transforms. And this will use the mesh and the childs as they are. And for the small branch issue, for the for the branch, I will choose an action to multiply that branch mask by height. So by multiplying it by height, it will add some darker values at the bottom of the tree. So let's convert again. And now, of course, the wind is reset, but I will set it back. No worries. As you can see, those small branches are not entirely fixed, but it is definitely better. But the colliders are now the same as on the original mesh. Let's talk a bit about batching and instancing. So the Vegetation Engine shaders work with all these third-party renderers. They work with GPU instancing. They work with the SRP batcher. They might work with the hybrid renderer V2. I never tried it, so if you tried it and it works, please let me know. And they also work with static batching. But when setting the prefabs to static, and then when you enter in play mode, as you can see, the wind is blowing up. That's because you need to enable the batching support on the materials. If you select the prefab and go to the material, you have this option to enable the batching support. But instead of enabling for each material, I will use the material settings again. Under the presets, I will go to features, batching, and enable batching support. And now the batching support is applied. You need to keep in mind that with batching enabled, all the motion settings will change. So you will need to set the material settings with batching enabled if you want to use the prefabs in static batching mode. So now when I enter play mode, the wind is working correctly, but it is different compared to the wind when the batching is disabled. Finally, let's look at the global wind settings. The wind power is controlled by the global motion, and you can set it from calm to a strong wind. If you plan to change the wind direction at runtime, you will need to uncheck this option over here, so you can have a smooth transition. If you have it on, the motion will be jittery because the noise texture is moving in the wind direction, and there is no way to change that direction without having this jittery motion. So I will disable it. And you can always control this wind power and direction locally by using elements. And in this case, I have a wind power element. I can go and change the wind power by using it. And in the same way, I can change the direction. All right. One of the issues you might have is with the flutter motion is that it can be noisy at a greater distance. So in the global settings, there is this option to control the motion fade bias, and by lowering it, you can fade out the flutter motion at a greater distance. All right, and the last thing I want to show you, this is a new option added in TV. When using interaction elements, the interaction is using the bending mask, and as you can see, the tree is bending with the interaction. In the Vegetation Engine 4.8, I added this option to reduce the mask used for the interaction. So if I set it to 0, the mesh is actually rotated in that direction instead of bending. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Never use palm trees and conifers together like I did. If you are an SS2 developer and you are watching this, please add that branch variation so we can have some better wind. I hope YouTube will not blow up the compression with all this wind and flutter. And yeah, thanks for watching.